It's the week ending Friday the 22nd of August, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen European leaders gathering in Washington to show support for Volodymyr Zelensky, Palestinians fleeing Gaza City as Israel embarks on a ground assault, and a landmark High Court ruling about hotels housing asylum seekers. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And it's good to be back. Joining me today, as ever, senior editor of The Week Junior, Felicity Capon, plus sitting in for Harriet and Jamie this week, my fellow retrospectors from the week's digital team. It's Rebecca Messina and the rich man's Olly Mann, Arian McNichol. Now, I don't know if you chaps spotted this week that the world's longest-serving KFC employee had her funeral in Taunton, Somerset, which involved the horse-drawn carriage with her coffin in it passing the branch she worked in. I'm just curious whether you have a significant location in your lives that you would like your funeral cortege to pass. Where would be a significant place for you?
Does it have to be a fast food outlet?
It doesn't, but I think, let's be honest, it would be in your case.
Yeah, you know what? Because I was already thinking you were going to say it has to be a restaurant, and I'd already prepared Wagamamas, and then when you got to the end, I thought, I can't say Wagamamas now, but that's probably the answer.
I'm surprised. I didn't realise. I wasn't even thinking of having a funeral procession. Are you guys all planning an actual procession with like horses? Because I need to massively upgrade my plans.
I like the idea of an In-N-Out burger for cremation and speed and efficiency.
That's so you, Arian. Got to choose a fast food restaurant. You choose one that's only available in California and is like the hipster's choice.
Yeah.
Anyway, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week, Africa insisted that when it comes to cartography, size really does matter.
There's a very tangible link between the map and perception, because undermining and showing a reduced continent and a smaller continent very much undermines also that false perception of importance and power on the global stage.
Farah Anjai, the co-founder of Speak Up Africa, speaking to Reuters on Saturday. Arian, what's the story?
So this week, the African Union, which represents the interests of 55 African countries, has endorsed a campaign to have organizations around the world replace the map of the globe that we're all familiar with, which is known as the Mercator projection, with alternatives such as the 2018 Equal Earth map, which supporters say just more accurately represents the true size of Africa. And in the Equal Earth map, for example, Africa, when shown in its true proportions, dwarfs Europe, which the map that we're used to seeing doesn't do. And South America is much bigger than we're used to seeing it as well. And this may sound like a trivial tweak, but supporters say that that kind of a change fundamentally shifts our understanding of the world.
Yeah, I saw one of the people representing Africa No Filter, which is another organisation backing this plan, Felicity, describe the Mercator map, the map that shows Africa as smaller than it actually is, as being, quote, the world's longest misinformation campaign. Do you have some sympathy for that?
I mean, it's hard to get away from the fact that it is inaccurate, and it is kind of mind-blowing when you actually see the true sizes of some of the territories, particularly Greenland. I must admit, I fell into the same camp as Donald Trump in not realizing that Greenland is actually much smaller than it appears on the map. Greenland looks absolutely huge. It looks about the same size as Africa, and it's not even a tenth as big. So it did kind of blow my mind. It is inaccurate, but I think the reasons for why it looks the way it is maybe more innocent than, realised. It came into being by a Flemish cartographer who was Gerardus Mercator, it was a navigation tool basically that he was trying to make it easier for sailors to navigate. And I mean, anytime you're trying to put a 3D sphere globe onto a 2D projection, there's always going to be inaccuracies. So it's definitely inaccurate, but I don't think I don't think he was trying to set out to diminish Africa.
Sure, but Rebecca, does it matter whatever the intentions of Mercator were in 1569? I mean, it does seem reasonable to say we're in 2025 now, we should have an accurate map. I mean, it doesn't mean that we're, saying that the old map was a bad thing.
The thing is, of course, there's no way, as Felicity was saying, there's not really a way to have an accurate map. Whenever you're doing a flat map of a spherical object like the Earth, there always have to be compromises. And in Mercator's case, it comes down to what maps are for. In Mercator's case, he was making a map for sailors. The important thing was that you could navigate based on the map. The reason that became popular was that it showed the room lines, those are the lines that you'd follow if you kept your compass pointing in the same direction. And in reality, those lines curl around the Earth, but Mercator's projection made them appear straight. That made them more valuable to sailors than scale. If you know the shape of Australia and how to steer to it or around it, the question of how it compares in size to Greenland is pretty abstract. But there's certainly an argument to be made that today we are living in a world where obviously people do still rely on maps for navigation, but the majority of people who are looking at a flat map, say on a classroom wall or on a browser screen, are not looking at it because they're trying to navigate from one side of the Earth to the other, and that there is potentially more value in a map that shows land proportionate to its size than there is in one that you could follow with a compass.
Yeah, and that distinction's worth making still, isn't it, Arian? People who are using maps for navigation are still using maps based on Mercator, remarkably, even though it is hundreds of years old. Whereas the ones that are going to be on a classroom wall, that's where the argument is. It disproportionately skews land masses.
I think that's right. And the idea that the African Union is driving at by accepting this to take up this campaign is that they're trying to redress the idea of map bias. So by putting these maps into classrooms and places where we're used to looking at what the world ought to look like, that will help to offset the fact that by, enlarging Europe and North America and placing them prominently while shrinking regions like Africa and South America and Southeast Asia and so on, kind of skews perceptions of importance and power. And there have actually been studies that show that humans naturally associate size with significance. That's fairly obvious when you sort of think about it. But that's led many people, even school children, to kind of overestimate the prominence of Western nations and think that places like Africa are consequently less important. And so there was this one fascinating test that was done by Thomas Saarinen, who's a geographer who did map studies in the 1980s and 90s. And he'd get people to do a sketch map from their brain to try to remember what the world looks like without actually looking at a map. Yeah. And lots of people would tend to put their own country at the center of that map, obviously, and then draw the rest of the world around it. But for many people who had grown up in places that used to be part of European colonies, they'd often put just the Mercator map up, that they were really influenced by this old projection of what it used to look like and all of the power dynamics that came with that. So there is this kind of subtle thing that goes into our heads, and that's what the word map bias is all about. And that's the thing that the African Union is trying to undo here.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, Felicity? Because if I did that exercise, if I drew the map from memory, of course, Europe is at the centre of it. I mean, actually, that doesn't really change from an African perspective because therefore Africa is also at the centre of it as it happens. But the point is, on a globe, whether we're talking about disproportionate lines and things being stretched or whatever, the centre isn't really a thing either when you make it two-dimensional. Why is Europe and Africa always at the centre of it? It could just as easily be North and South America, or it could just as easily be Russia, but it isn't.
True, but I guess that also goes back to the fact that Mercator was Flemish, right? So presumably that's also how, I might be wrong, I'm totally making this up, but isn't that how you see the most amount of countries on a 2D bit of paper, is to have Europe and Africa kind of in the middle?
Oh, because of oceans and things. Yeah. The Australian is shaking his head.
Oh, well, no, I've seen all of these weird and fascinating maps. There's this Chinese map which puts the South Pole roughly in the middle of the map, and that gets China into the top middle, and that the result is that all the other land masses then kind of emanate out of it. And the weirdest one I saw is this Australian map that flips the whole globe upside down and then obviously puts Australia in the middle of the map. And it's a subversive effort to make North America and Europe look like afterthoughts. So there are totally different ways that you can arrange the Earth, and we just have this sense that Mercator is the right one.
Although, of course, I mean, most people, when they think of maps these days, I would argue, Rebecca, are thinking about Google Maps. So that changes everything anyway, doesn't it? I'm just back from my holidays. We sailed from Portsmouth to St. Malo. I was on the boat showing the kids where we were. First thing you do is open up Google Maps, zoom in, and to try and make sense of the direction the boat's going, you tilt Britain round so it's in the south. And you're heading to France, which is north, and you suddenly everything looks really different. You think, God, France is massive.
Yeah, and Google has switched. Google Maps now uses the Equal Earth map rather than the Mercator one on the browser version, although the app still uses the Mercator version. I'm not quite clear why. I couldn't quite get to the bottom of it, but I think it probably comes down to aesthetics as much as anything else. Google wants to offer something to its users that they are familiar with that's not going to alienate them. I expect that they will switch over eventually, though. The World Bank is also in the process of switching over, and I think it will become the default. I mean, the thing that has slowed down acceptance of some of the alternative maps proposed in the past has often been just purely aesthetic. One of the more popular alternatives is the Gould-Peters map. It's based on one that was developed in the 1850s, then it was sort of rediscovered, reinvented in the 1970s on a wave of anti-colonial feeling, and that did offer a much more proportionally correct distribution of the Earth's land masses, but it visually distorted it in a way that was not only inaccurate, because again, you always have to sacrifice something, and so if you look at a Gould-Peters map, Africa looks really long and weird. What it actually looks like, the whole map looks like you downloaded something in the wrong dimensions and then you uploaded it and you're like, oh, it's all stretched. It looks really stupid and weird now. So there's just something about that map that's always looked a bit wrong. And in fact, the Equal Earth map, the one that the African Union has thrown its weight behind now, was developed in response to some schools deciding to adopt the Gould-Peters map as a more accurate alternative to the Mercator. It's like these people saw them adopting this map that visually looks really horrible. I'm like, we have to come up with something different that looks much better. And the Equal Earth one uses curved edges, and the projection is more sort of splayed in a way more reminiscent of a globe, which enables it to both be more accurate to the proportionate size of the countries, but also retain a more sort of pleasing shape.
Okay, but why does any of this matter, really? I mean, Felicity, the argument, I guess, that the organisations that back this are making is that this will help African countries sort of feel themselves, basically. Look how big and important we are, and it will help the other countries around the world come to that conclusion as well. But geographic reality doesn't have anything to do with politics and corruption and economy and investment and all those sorts of things that actually make a difference to how a nation performs.
Yeah, I'm slightly dubious and skeptical as how this will massively make a difference. I think when you look at a map of Africa, what is more striking and more egregious is really how Africa was carved up and how where the territories of different countries lie was basically concocted by Europeans in the 1800s, mostly at the 1884 Berlin Conference between the Germans and the Brits. And it was all part of the scramble for Africa. It was a lot of imperial nations just dividing it up willy-nilly with no kind of thought to different ethnicities or different, how the people who actually lived there, how their territories should work. And that has caused, issues that go on and on and on right up until the present day. And one of the most fascinating is the Caprivi strip in Namibia, which if you look at a map of Namibia is this very, very tiny, long, thin panhandle strip, which is very, very odd. And the whole idea was that the Germans agreed with the Brits that they needed this strip to connect two of their territories. They got thwarted by the Victoria Falls. I mean, they hadn't even been to the area and they didn't know the Victoria Falls was there, which was going to be massively in their way. But all these sort of random territories and lines were put in place by Europeans, and it explains things like the Rwandan genocide between the Tutsis and Hutus. So when I saw the story, when I actually look at a map of Africa, it's more the kind of completely arbitrary lines and boundaries that I think have been a bigger stumbling block for Africa achieving the economic prowess that it could do.
Harriet?
Oh, I mean, I think there's truth to that, and there's so many problems that can be drawn from European engagement with the continent of Africa broadly. But I think this is kind of low-hanging fruit for the African Union, which has formally declared 2025 to be its year of justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. And that is an initiative that's intended to try to address all of those ongoing injustices that have stemmed from the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism and apartheid. And, of course, you can't undo those lines between countries now that those have been drawn without, again, causing loads more wars. But this is a thing that you actually can do fairly easily. There was an internal memo that was seen by the New York Times where the African Union said that the push for a new map sat perfectly with this 2025 theme. And the organisers felt that the map campaign is kind of perfect in how it pushes back at misleading narratives about the continent and supports efforts to restore Africa's position on the global stage. So, some things it's going to be very hard to undo, but this is one that you could fairly easily undo without too much effort, with literally a stroke of the pen. And so that seems like just a sort of natural progression, considering its simplicity.
And Rebecca, Felicity made a reference earlier to Donald Trump's impressions of Greenland, perhaps having been skewed by its relative size on the Mercator map. Is there a possibility that this is coming to a head now so that Africa can influence Donald Trump and say, look how big and important we are, and or organisations can say, look how relatively small Canada and Greenland are, stop trying to buy them? I mean, is that actually realistic?
Yeah, well, I mean, there is a lot of symbolism in maps. So this is sort of what we've been getting at through this whole topic, is that when there is no such thing as an accurate 2D representation of Earth, anytime that you try and create one, you are communicating your own priorities, your own biases. I mean, even Mercator's map had lots of limitations in that respect. He was mostly just doing the edges of countries, because this was a time when people didn't know what the interior of most of Africa and Asia and South America looked like. I mean, to be fair, his depiction also included some things that I don't think we should be putting on any maps that go in front of Donald Trump, like giants and sea monsters, lots of text boxes with Mercator's sort of quaint speculations about what might be in different countries. It was quite charming, but yeah, probably not something you want to hang on a classroom wall.
Okay. Up next, who would want to be flatmates with the most famous man in the world? That's after this. All right, Rebecca, it's your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This was the week the cost of living crisis got so bad that even the Pope is looking for roomies.
Father Ray Flores, an Augustinian, the same religious order as the Pope, hosted Pope Leo when he was Cardinal Prevost a year ago at St. Jude's in New Lenox.
We're just so thrilled that he was elected, that he's our Augustinian brother, that we know him so well, that we're connected to John. It's incredible.
That we may be able to do something with our own lives to serve others.
Father Ray Florence, in an interview with NBC Chicago on Saturday. He was sitting next to the Pope's brother, by the way, John Prevost. That's who he was referring to there. Rebecca, what's the story?
So the story is that this week, La Repubblica, the Italian daily, revealed that Pope Leo XIV is planning, when he moves into the papal palace, which he hasn't done yet, to have flatmates. I mean, I'm just joshing around. It's not a cost of living crisis situation. The reasons haven't been revealed. We can get into that. But the gist of it is that they are going to be sharing a 10-room papal apartment within the palace. There's plenty of room in there for them. There is a library, there is a study, there's even a medical suite, which is probably needed because 3 of the last 6 popes did die in the papal apartments. So there's plenty of amenities. Unfortunately for, if you're listening and thinking that sounds like something I might enjoy the sound of, the word is that he has already chosen the people who'll be living with him, and it may not surprise you to know that they are all Augustinian friars.
Yes, and that's the point, isn't it, Arian? People have said, what makes this pope different? The last pope seemed so different in a lot of the decisions that he made. One of the things is that he is from an Augustinian order. Their whole thing is about living together as brethren and all the rest of it.
Yeah, exactly. Augustinians really value relationships and friendship in particular very highly. And in moving in with a group of other Augustinian friars alongside him in the papal apartments, Leo is said to be trying to create a kind of community setting, much like how, say, US presidents do, moving their family into the White House, or the UK Prime Minister getting their family into Downing Street or whatever. But in his public addresses, Pope Leo has also regularly emphasized fraternity and friendship as being essential for peace. And there's really kind of core Augustinian ideas. The view of the order is that the path to peace and the path to knowledge are both journeys that are taken in the company of others, and particularly with your friends. And many even say that it's through friendship that God finds them. In fact, there's a sermon from Augustine, who is the 4th century theologian and philosopher after whom the Augustinians were named, in which he tells his congregation, "I don't want to be saved without you." It's a really powerful expression of the communal sort of sense of salvation, emphasizing this idea that faith and redemption, they're not things that you can do alone. You have to do them with others. So I think that is the symbolism, at least, of what's going on here.
But, Felicity, the Vatican, it's also a political organisation in so many ways, isn't it? And, this strikes me as a little bit like a prime minister having his personal advisor on hand, unelected, not necessarily part of the party machine. The Pope's going to have his closest mates and advisors. And what are they going to discuss in the evening? They're going to talk about all the things that, he's been talking about with the Vatican machine, but he's going to get an honest take from them. You can see how very quickly that could be something that people around them might resent.
Possibly, but I think it's a really good thing. I think it's a really bold move. I mean, he already sort of wields so much power, and it's not really a democratic process as to how the Pope gets elected. He's been quoted as saying the Pope is not a lone leader or a leader placed above others. The idea that I think he's going to consult widely and need to talk to people about the decisions he makes, especially with so many issues going on in the world, seems like a really positive step forward. And it's in stark contrast to Francis, who he worked alone and he made decisions alone. And I would say that as a leader in general, to be able to have the humility and wisdom to consult as many people around you is a really, really good thing. So I think that's really interesting. But I think the kind of how he is positioning himself in contrast to Francis is really, really interesting, because obviously Francis had this reputation of being very, very humble and lowly, and he didn't live in the Vatican apartments, and he didn't have the fancy car, and he didn't wear the fancy clothes. And
a Pope the Guardian could get behind.
Yeah, he did, exactly. He didn't holiday at the papal summer residence. And Leo has actually decided to reinstate that tradition of going to Castel Gandolfo outside of Rome. I think it was partly because the heat in Rome was so awful. And I think when he first appeared at St. Peter's Square, he was back wearing the gold cross around his neck and wearing silver pendant and the embroidered stole. So he is sort of moving back to the more traditional image that we have of the Pope as being quite grand and having all the trappings. But it's just quite interesting how he is putting his own stamp on it and sort of making his own papacy known, I suppose.
Yeah, what have Catholics made of this decision so far, Rebecca? It seems to me quite hard, actually, to get a grip on what people think about this.
Yeah, well, I mean, the news is only relatively recently broken, but the response, at least from Vatican analysts, has been one of surprise. I think his decision to move back into the papal palace after it had been empty for 12 years under Pope Francis was seen broad. I mean, of course, the Catholic Church is very divided, but I think was broadly seen as a positive sign, especially among conservatives who were very alarmed by some of Francis's, not only his reforms to the church, but also his personal decisions. I mean, when you say, I would like to be humble like Jesus and not live in these fancy apartments and not wear these fancy clothes, there's no way really to say that without there being an undertone of shade to your predecessors who did do those things. So that was alarming to a lot of people. So I think what Leo is trying to do is establish that he, on one hand, is returning to tradition and orthodoxy, that he's not shying away necessarily from the trappings of the papacy either, but that he's trying to do it in a way that injects some of that same humility that Catholics and the world at large responded to well in Francis. So we can see him sort of threading the needle in lots of ways. One, moving into the apartments, but he's going to be there with his Augustinian brothers. It's going to be on a more equal basis, we can assume. Certainly the idea that we can glean, but also even the visit to the summer papal palace in Castel Gandolfo, he went there. Francis never went there, but when he was there, he did host a mass and a lunch for the homeless people of the area while he was in town. So you can see he's trying to make statements that will communicate to the clergy and to the Catholic lay people that he is going to take care of the church. He's not going to shun its traditions, even when they are maybe at odds with what you might call PR in the modern world. But at the same time, he's going to bring that spirit of humility along with him.
Yeah, I mean, on that question of PR, Rebecca. And this is an awkward question to ask, never mind answer, but I feel I should ask it because it's hard to ignore the comments. You know, you look on the news stories about the Pope's flatmates and basically all the comments are essentially innuendo about him and his special friends living in. Do you think the Vatican might be concerned about how that implication might look to Catholics?
Are you saying because one of them is his 36-year-old, quite handsome personal secretary, Father Edgar Ivan Rimay Cunha, whom he met during his time in Peru? I don't like these implications. No, I'll tell you who the people are that are going to be living with him. They're all fathers. So you've got Rimay Cunha, who again has been his friend for a very long time, is now his personal secretary. I don't know about innuendo, but I just don't know if it's a good idea to live with your boss work-life balance-wise. But
right.
You know, apparently they are best buds. And we don't know the identities. This is all speculation, but the report in La Repubblica speculated that the other three could be the pontifical sacristans. They have responsibility for the Sistine Chapel, but by extension also for preparing vestments, chalices, altar linen, that kind of thing for the Pope's appearances, and also offering spiritual support to him as well. And historically, this task has always been undertaken by the Order of St. Augustine, which is quite convenient. And the sacristans currently are Father Bruno Salvestrini, who's Italian, Father Giovanni Rebaya, who's Filipino, and Father Augustine Chukwama Ugboma, who is Nigerian. So there's plenty of scope for some cross-cultural roommate comedy as well.
Beautifully swerved. Arian, it has been the Pope's first 100 days. How do you mark his progress? It's interesting. He has kind of vanished from the news agenda, interestingly, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because 100 days may be a solid period to try to analyze political trajectories. But it's a really short period of time in what might be a 15 to 20 year papacy in, let's face it, a 2 millennia old religion. So there's only so much that we can get from this in a sense. Although I think it is important to remember that Pope Leo didn't campaign to be Pope. He had no platform and he only learned that he was going to be Pope on the day of his election. But in these first 100 days, we can start to see some themes emerging. He's already addressed war and peace and migration and the environment, much like his predecessor, Pope Francis. And Francis was known as a pope of bold gestures, as Rebecca was kind of alluding to, which often upset a lot of people, particularly the conservative wing of the church. Leo's approach tends to be, at least so far, a bit more restrained, but I think many Catholics remain hopeful that he will carry forward the good bits of Francis's substance, even if his style is a little bit more understated. Though, again, a bit more grand in the vestments that he's willing to wear. But I think one of the early telling moments was when Pope Leo celebrated a new liturgy of Mass that emphasized the environment. And now that was actually in the works under Francis, but it came out under Leo. And it shows that he really cares about how climate change will affect particularly the poorer parts of the world that are seeing the really harsh effects of climate change more keenly. Also, earlier this month, Leo spoke to the Jubilee of Youth near Rome about the importance of solidarity between young people there and young people living through wars in Gaza and Ukraine. And he talked about his vision for a world that was free of violence. Now, this, of course, is a thing that probably every pope is going to talk about, but I think it spoke to the fact that he's not going to be afraid to weigh in on global issues like Francis did. So again, we're reading tea leaves here in everything that he does in this very early period. But I think we can at least start to determine some themes of his papacy.
And again, finally, Felicity, just to return to what you were saying earlier, the fact that we can analyse or attempt to analyse what he thinks as an individual, that his statements as an individual are taken so seriously, when he is just ultimately one man representing an enormous organisation of millions of people, you can see why, you know, having a more collegiate lifestyle, innuendo aside, would just be helpful. It's quite a lonely job, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's right at the top. He's this lone figurehead in charge of overseeing this church of billions of people. There must be a huge weight of responsibility. It must be incredibly lonely. So yeah, I'm sure that's part of it. And I think it's refreshing and bold that he has admitted that he likes community and he wants people around him. And I think that's can only be can only be a good thing, really. And, he's also made it clear that he's very interested in geopolitics and has this kind of like affinity with connecting with other people. He wants to, I think he's announced that he wants to visit Lebanon as his first major international trip. Obviously going to the Middle East, he's very interested in that. But it speaks to an idea of trying to resolve conflict, resolve wars, peace, community, people getting on from different faiths. And I think this probably all goes back to the Augustinian religious order from which he has clearly, picked up so much.
Yeah. Also, maybe he'll get to have a house party now, and that'd be nice for the Pope. Okay, up next, hide your chips. The menace on the streets of Scarborough. That's after this. Felicity, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is this the week we found out that all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others?
Birds are not aggressive creatures, miss. They bring beauty into the world. It is mankind, rather, who insists upon making it difficult for life to exist upon this planet.
I mean, birds just don't go around attacking people without no reason. You know what I mean?
I think we're in real trouble.
Huh?
I don't know how this started or why, but I know it's here and we'd be crazy to ignore it.
To ignore what? The bird war?
Yes, the bird war, the bird attack plague. Call it what you like. They're massing out there someplace and they'll be back. You can count on it.
Some breaking news there from over 60 years ago. A clip from the trailer of Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. Felicity, why?
Oh, just because of seagulls, really. The Guardian reported on Tuesday that seaside authorities across England are grappling with an influx of gulls and lots of complaints from various locals. So there were 220 reports of gull incidents on the Yorkshire coast between 2021 and June this year, according to figures from North Yorkshire Council.
Can we just unpick that? What's a gull incident?
A gull incident, I think it's anything where they are like stealing food, being violent, being aggressive, any kind of sort of interaction with a gull that is not a happy one.
220 reports. Who are they reporting it to? What? I mean, a seagull steals some crisps and someone tells the police? What?
I think the council.
Okay, wow. I mean, I guess the point I'm making is the real figure must be larger, right?
Yeah, I'm sure it's much, much, much larger. I'm sure there are many people who aren't reporting it, but nevertheless, they are a real menace and causing many, many problems. I
mean, are you bringing us this story, Felicity? I think it's apt to mention that you live by the coast, because this is something that affects you.
Yes. Yes, I live in Folkestone, so I'm by the seaside, and they are a problem, and they're definitely getting way more emboldened, way more ferocious and fearsome. But they are very divisive. Some people love them, some people hate them. In Folkestone, we actually have Mediterranean gulls, which are a rare gull. But yes, it does seem that more people are reporting them to the councils, and councils are having to spend more money on trying to solve the problem.
Okay. I mean, can we really evidence, Arian, that there are, quote, more of these attacks, these incidents happening? Haven't seagulls always stolen food? It's that now that, someone's bothered to write it down?
I think that we are seeing more of these incidents being reported to at least North Yorkshire Council. There was also a yearly census that's conducted, which was looking into or continues to look into the number of occupied kittiwake nests. Now, just a quick side note, I always thought that seagulls were just a type of bird, but of course that's a catch-all for lots of different types of gulls, like the Mediterranean gulls near Felicity, or herring gulls and kittiwakes that are the ones that are showing up in Scarborough. But yes, this annual census is showing that there are many more of these occupied nests. In fact, a 39% increase over recent years. And again, depending on how you frame the story, I think that could be a sign of success in integrating wildlife into cities.
Yeah, it's a good news story. Yeah, native species, immigrant species joining them, not destroying the native population, and finding ways to find food. It's
I mean, there's that metaphorical aspect to how you could read it, but also, birds move into urban areas partly because we feed them, or at least there's lots of food available to them. So if we want fewer birds, we have to change ourselves. It's not the bird's fault in and of itself.
Rebecca, are we to blame?
In a nutshell, yes. I mean, I come from Weymouth, so I know about seagulls. You know, all the houses on my street growing up was seagull-proofed, like around the chimneys. There was literally a road near my house that my mum couldn't walk down because a seagull would attack her every time she did. Like, I understand they are a menace, and they have been a menace ever since I can remember. But I do think they are getting a little bit bolder, and that is because, you know, we are now generations and generations into gulls. I'm talking specifically about herring gulls, really. The big mean ones that you see on the seafront swiping people's chips are herring gulls. Kittiwakes look like seagulls, but they're a bit smaller, and they tend to feed out at sea in their natural hunting grounds. Although
Can I just be the pro-gull guy here and say that I love it?
Go for it.
I think they're cute. I think it's funny when they steal people's food. I've witnessed people cheer when they take away a chip. People enjoy that.
Oh, you are
talking,
just the sort of
If you're talking about a menace animal, that's a wasp. There's nothing fun about a wasp. A seagull's amusing.
No, it's not. You're like one of those grockles that throws a bunch of chips out onto the beach for them and then laughs like a fool and claps their hands as everyone else recoils in horror.
Yeah, and if you look at any of the tabloids, the tabloids are full of the most terrifying stories about seagulls and what they can do and how violent and aggressive they can be.
Like what? What do they do? Steal people's wigs? What do they do?
No, they'll attack. They attack. They will, they will give people like injuries, and they're vicious. They're more vicious than they used to be, certainly. But they are, weirdly enough, they are actually under threat. They are at risk of extinction, which seems to be completely crazy that everyone thinks.
Oh, you want it both ways, don't you?
By them. But a combination of overfishing, warmer seas means that they are actually under threat, which I think a lot of people don't realise. They're sort of thriving in urban environments because of the way we live our lives. And I saw a very good quote that says, because if we think they're dirty and disgusting, it's because we're dirty and disgusting. So it's fly tipping, it's leaving out all your takeaways, it's heat waves. The way we live our lives is why seagulls and rats and pigeons and all sorts of pests are getting more numerous and emboldened.
Do you have seagulls in Sydney?
We most certainly do. Silver gulls are the ones that have become the urban nuisance here, and they've got absolutely booming numbers. The same thing is going on here. It's easy access to human waste, and also lots of people having fish and chips around the harbour and on the beaches. But, apart from the fact that
it's also the British people's fault.
Which is also a fault of the British people. Colonialism all over again. But I think that their presence raises really multiple issues, at least from the people who find them problematic, yourself not included, Olly. There are the health risks from bacteria like E. coli and Salmonella, as well as that aggressive scavenging behaviour and the noise and mess in public spaces, contamination of water reservoirs, and also they do pose a significant hazard for aircraft. And Sydney Airport, I will confess, it's our own damn fault that we put the airport right on the coast. But there's an enormous amount of bird strikes annually, which do pose a genuine threat to aviation. So there are efforts around the airport in particular to try to bring the bird life under control, mostly through humane methods, and across the city as well. There was this hilarious thing that a mechanical hawk was installed at the Opera House at significant cost, mind you, in 2014. It completely failed to strike any fear into the resident seagulls whatsoever, nor did the kites that they put up that were meant to resemble owls, nor the audio deterrents that they tried to dissuade birds around Circular Quay. But
what was the audio deterrent? What, Wagner?
Yeah, like just pipe the warbling straight out of the Opera House, I guess. Yeah. But the thing that has worked are the bird deterrent spikes, and I think they're quite effective in the UK as well. You put them on roofs and awnings, and that tries to discourage roosting around city areas. And, there are people, again, who say that that's not a very humane way of approaching the issue. And for a lot of people, I think, birds are synonymous with seaside life, and to get rid of them, particularly seagulls, seems kind of a travesty and would be halving the experience of why you go to the seaside in the first place.
Felicity, this has also been an issue in India, I understand.
Well, not with seagulls, but with animals, birds that people don't want. So in Delhi, authorities have been ordered by a court to capture all stray dogs, have them sterilised and vaccinated and relocate them. The court gave authorities 8 weeks to create facilities and install CCTV monitoring to ensure that the animals are not released back onto the streets. And that's partly because some of the dogs can be a threat to children and elderly and attack them. And that's because India bears the highest rabies burden globally. So every year, about 5,700 people die from rabies. But it's been very, very, very divisive. I mean, lots of people really love these stray dogs and feed them and look after them. And then the other story to come out of India was from Mumbai, where another court ban, this time centered on feeding pigeons. So feeding pigeons has now been banned in public spaces in the West Indian city. And that's again because people are worried about the pigeon droppings posing a risk of all sorts of illnesses that they cause. And again, that has also been divisive, that lots of people, love the pigeons. And I guess we have the same thing in this country, that pigeons are everywhere. Most people think they're kind of smelly and gross and disgusting. They did all descend from homing pigeons. So the fact that they're smelly and gross and disgusting is because we made them so. But it just goes to show, cities around the world are grappling with all manner of different pests. And I guess the obvious one would also be rats, mega rats, where cities pretty much across the map are dealing with huge numbers of rats, and they're huge in size as well.
Yeah, pigeons I don't mind watching from afar. Stray dogs I don't want eating my chips, and rats I don't want in the same continent as me.
Yeah, and the problem, no matter where it is around the world, is that authorities do have to strike a delicate balance of not upsetting the people who actually enjoy having these animal companions in the urban environment. We've seen it in Mumbai. People are coming along and pulling off the tarpaulin covers the authorities have placed over the pigeon, this sort of like dovecotes, but for pigeons, where people go and feed them. They say covered them with the tarpaulin. Now people are pulling them off. And even in Scarborough, which on the surface does not have that much in common with Mumbai, I think we could probably say, we've seen a similar reaction when the council has tried to crack down on gulls. One thing that they did install was fire gel on the cliff bridge in Scarborough. Now, fire gel sounds very scary, but it's actually just a substance that in gull vision appears to be shining like fire. So they think it's fire, so they don't go there, they don't nest there. But those installations were sabotaged by gull allies who knocked the canisters down.
Okay. Squawk! That is seagull for we have reached the end of this show. Thank you, everybody. Felicity, Arian and Rebecca. You can follow this show for free. You can get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, by the way, where you can now watch us too. And you can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription if you go to theweek.com/subscriptions. Also, incidentally, if you enjoyed hearing Arian and Rebecca and myself all chatting, then do check out our daily history podcast. That's called Today in History with the Retrospectors. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week,